All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking an absolutely incredible story. We're going to look closely at the life trajectory of a guy named Gnarfard. Now, at first glance, his high school years look like your classic tragedy. But here's the thing. That narrative is completely backwards. What we are really examining today is how a kid built this mythic, powerful life straight out of academic wreckage. It's a really compelling story about systemic pressure, incredible ambition, and ultimately triumph. So let's dig in and explain exactly how this happens.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda for today. We're going to start with the burden of family legacy, then examine the illusion of the blueprint, and look at the crucible of academic overload. After that, we'll break down the systemic collapse, find delight in the wreckage, and finally look at his worldly success.
Section 1. The burden of family legacy, invisible pressures. Look, to truly understand academic burnout, we really have to empathize with the intense, hidden pressures carried by first-generation college aspirants. We have to ask ourselves, what happens when a student is tasked with carrying a generational burden rather than just a backpack? We need to completely reframe our narrative around this sociological weight, because this isn't just about homework, right? It's about identity, it's about legacy, it's survival. It's basically an invisible backpack filled with expectations that most teachers and administrators don't even know is there. Think about it. Gnarford wasn't just competing with the kids sitting next to him in class. He was out there competing with family ghosts on an absolute psychological battlefield. Here's a kid with free lunch and divorced parents looking at UC Irvine as his ultimate salvation. But it's more than that. He was born to two brilliant scholar parents, and he had an older half-brother whose life basically served as a massive cautionary tale. Gnarford wasn't just trying to pass his midterms. He was desperately trying to outrun his brother's fate and prove he fundamentally belonged in his parents' intellectual lineage. When a teenager's trying to rewrite an entire family narrative through test scores, well, every single assignment feels like a literal life or death scenario. Section 2. Blueprint illusion. The fantasy versus reality. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens next. When teenagers carry this much invisible weight and they don't have a safety net, they desperately look for a roadmap. Anywhere. Gnarfard looked to shows like The O.C., One Tree Hill, and Gossip Girl. You know, those shows where 30-year-old actors play teenagers who magically solve their profound life problems in 45 minutes before a commercial break. And sure, these shows provided a sort of emotional rehearsal for life, teaching the feeling of courage. But they completely failed to teach the real-world mechanics of courage under a crushing academic load. He didn't join the wrestling team or the basketball team. He didn't start a homework club, not because he forgot, but because he froze. He was choosing day-to-day survival over extracurriculars. The blueprint offered by pop culture, it was a complete fantasy. Section 3. Academic overload. The crucible. So we're going to shift our focus now from the emotional weight to the actual mechanical failure of an overclocked system. I mean, just look at this brutal course load. AP US History, Honors English 2, Honors Coordinated Science 2, AP English 3, AP Computer Science, Algebra 2. This wasn't a schedule for a high school sophomore or junior. This was literally a load meant for a graduate student. Gnarfard took all this on because he genuinely believed that hard work alone would be enough to secure his destiny. But let's be absolutely clear here. His eventual burnout was absolutely not a sign of weakness. No way. It was the mathematical certainty of taking on an elite-level schedule that's practically designed to break people. We need to take a step back and objectively strip away all that shame attached to a falling grade point average. Let's redefine it. A GPA is simply a snapshot of consistency under extreme, rigid pressure. That's it. It is not, and honestly never has been, a true measure of intelligence, character, or long-term capacity. Gnarford's falling GPA was a metric of the educational system's rigidity, not a reflection of his own personal capability. Think of it like this. When you put a brilliant mind into a machine designed only to measure endurance, you aren't measuring brilliance anymore. You're just measuring exactly when the engine overheats. Section 4. Systemic collapse. Failure of the system. Now, we need to look objectively at the climax of his high school trauma, where all that pressure finally broke the container. There was this specific, devastating moment in his junior year. The grades had slipped. And because GPAs compound and have really long, unforgiving memories, the math became undeniable. Imagine the quiet grief, that low hum of shame that must have set in when he realized the door to UC Irvine, his specific, highly personal dream school, was permanently closed. But we really have to ask a deeper, more theoretically grounded question here. What was that shame really about? Because for a low-income student without a financial or social safety net, academic failure isn't just about a letter grade on a transcript.
It feels exactly like class failure. It feels like reaching above your station and being actively punished for making the attempt. The system offers zero soft landing, no gentle redirection for those who overreach, even though overreaching is exactly what they were instructed to do by literally every teacher, counselor, and motivational poster in the entire building.
And the system's failure culminated in this absolute tragedy. Completely overwhelmed and utterly exhausted, Narfared literally collapsed to his hands and knees in a hallway. It wasn't a performance. His body simply couldn't carry the physical and psychological weight for one more second. But instead of, offering support, an administrator misinterpreted this pure vulnerability as strange behavior and expelled him. Let's state this very clearly. His expulsion was not justice for misconduct. It was a catastrophic misinterpretation by an educational system that only knows how to reward machines, penalizing a brilliant human being who simply hit his biological breaking point.
Section 5. Light and Wreckage. A crack of light. But here is where the story turns. Even in the absolute lowest moment of this systemic collapse, something incredible happened. Right amidst the failing grades and the overwhelming shame, Gnarfart wrote an Honors English 2 essay about The Catcher in the Rye and Holden Caulfield. Which is ironic, right? Since Holden is a character who also deeply understood the phoniness and cruelty of rigid systems. Anyway, he received a perfect A+. That single grade was a crack of light in the dark. It proved that his genuine excellence, his ability to think and write brilliantly, remained entirely intact beneath all that wreckage. As the source material beautifully puts it, sometimes a perfect thing in the wreckage is enough to keep moving. I want that to just sink in for a second. That single sentence holds immense emotional weight and resilience. It's a reminder that survival doesn't require a perfect record. It just requires a singular, undeniable truth to hold on to. Now, what's really interesting about this is how we can zoom out and map his exact lived experience directly onto the classic mythic framework of the hero's journey. He didn't just fail high school, he underwent a mythic trial. From the ordinary world of the Wendy's dining room to the brutal ordeal of systemic collapse to the revelation of his own persistent brilliance, and finally, the long road back, where he builds a life entirely on his own terms. It's a framework that brings immense dignity to something that otherwise just looks like failure. And from this massive ordeal, Gnarfard derived some highly pragmatic, actionable takeaways. This is the exact advice he wishes someone had given him back then. Step 1. Colleges want rigor you can actually handle, so choose depth over quantity. Loading up on 6 AP classes, it's a trap. Step 2. Pride is not a recovery plan. Actually asking for help is a legitimate strategy. Step 3. UC Irvine wasn't the only door. There are countless legitimate roads to a genuinely good life. And finally, step 4. Hold on to that one moment of genuine excellence because one good thing is enough to thread your way out of the dark. Section 6. Worldly Success. Integration of Identity. Bard outgrew the system entirely and built a spectacular life. But it really begs the question, how many brilliant minds are we losing to the wreckage right now simply because they aren't machines? Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for exploring this with me on The Explainer. I'll see you next time.